All I'm doing here is just measuring to get an approximate center so that I have a point to attach the faceplate. This is a time lapse, just showing kind of real quickly how to get some rough shaping. Remember, what you're seeing right here in the forefront of the image is actually going to be the bottom of the bowl. Always remember to wear your face mask or something to protect your face. And as you can see, as we're moving along here rather quick, that left side where the tool is cutting is really starting to take shape. All that I'm doing here is just flattening the bottom a little bit so that I can find my center, so that I can measure out to roughly 1 1/4, 1.5 inches, so that I can get my cleat started so that I can attach my 4-jaw chuck. Now I'm going to change over to a skew so I can do a back cut on that cleat just to create a little bit of an angle to help the 4-jaw chuck grab hold. I just wanted to show a close-up image of how that cleat with that back cut angle, how it really makes a difference. Right there in that freeze frame, you can see the angle. Although I'm using carbide tipped cutting tools, Rockler happens to make a nice little honing system so that you can sharpen the carbide tips just so they'll last a little bit longer. Just be careful to not sharpen them too much so they get too thin, because they will start to shatter if they get too thin. Remember, always wear your safety shield. All I'm going to start doing here is just working on the edges a little bit. This happens to be about 1200 RPM, a little faster than I like, but it's going to work with the walnut because it is such a hard wood. Over this entire video, you're going to see a whole lot of starts and stops, kind of edited on purpose just so to reinforce start and stopping and checking those edges just to make sure it's exactly how you want it to be. Again, stop, check your wood, see what kind of condition it's in. So I'm just changing over to a round cutting tool, just a little bit easier to control, just a little simpler, because with all that bark that's on there, it was kind of chattering at times, which really was very uncomfortable. So again, with the round cutting tool, you're getting a very small cut, very small contact with the piece. Now I'm going to install a drill chuck, which is that right there, and that's going to hold a Forstner bit, and I'm going to attach that to the tailstock. And what this is going to do is that with the Forstner bit in that position, it will drill a hole directly in the center of the blank. With that hole, it will be in the center, which will just make it a little simpler to hog out a lot of wood very quickly. Now with the hole in the center, you're going to bring the banjo back over, attach the tool rest, and then just start removing an awful lot of wood. I'm going to start with a square carbide tip just because that's very quick and fast at removing a lot. Changing over to a round cutting tip, again, just because it's a little easier to control. I'm also going to start to form the taper down the sides of the bowl. This section, you can see where I'm pointing with my finger. There's that was really unusual to try to cut through. It was very difficult, and I was very worried about it would all of a sudden would come off in a big chunk. You can even see where there's like portions missing, and I was afraid the tool might catch and just peel the whole thing apart. Through the magic of editing, you can see the bell or the flare really starting to take shape. Just working on the inside, and right here I'm making a very aggressive cut to make it very deep, very quick. You can see the line as it's starting to grow to the bottom of the bowl. Stopping just to inspect the condition, and I notice right here there's a very large crack. You can see that as well as a chip missing. So what that means is I got to be very careful moving forward. So as I'm starting from the inside, working my way out, I'm using a very aggressive cut at the bottom, but then I have very light touch as I come up towards the edge. In fact, I'm even rotating the tool slightly down just to make sure that I don't catch that crack or that missing piece. If it does, it'll just split the entire piece completely. Stopping the piece just to check, and at this point I'm really getting nervous about splitting the whole piece, so I'm going to go ahead and start rounding over that outer edge using a very light touch. Very light. You can start to see how it's starting to just create a little bit of the rounding portion at the top. So that is 150 grit sandpaper. The RPM is roughly 1200 RPM. And if you notice, I'm letting the paper do the work. Although my fingers are inside the bowl, I'm not pressing very hard at all, afraid to catch an edge. So just let the paper do all the work. It's going to transition over. That's obviously 150 grit, and do the exact same thing, where on the outside of the bowl you can apply a little bit of pressure using your fingertips. But once your hand goes on the inside, let the paper do the work. Don't press too hard, otherwise you'll catch a finger. In this part, using 320 grit sandpaper, watch and see what happens when I'm not paying close enough to the edge. Luckily, it was just the paper that was ripped out of my hands and I didn't catch a finger. If you notice at this portion, I actually bend the sandpaper just a little bit, just to give it a little bit of an edge. And you'll also notice that there's letting the paper do the work. Don't get your fingers too close at all. With the cleat on this bowl, I decided that I'm going to use basically a belt sander in order to remove the cleat. I could have just as easily tried to saw it off, but in the past I've left some marks at the bottom that I didn't really care for. So in this case, just using a belt sander or a sanding station works just fine. Just pay attention to make sure you keep it flat and be sure to keep rotating. You'll see that I cleaned the belt with the belt eraser and just keep working it over and over, slowly rotating it and making sure that I keep it flat. Applying the finish is always the best part of any project, and in my case I use a 50-50 mix of shellac you buy right off the shelf in combination with denatured alcohol, also at a 50-50 mix. So in this case I'm pouring 1/3 cup of shellac, 1/3 cup of denatured alcohol, and just transferring it over to a jar that has a tight closing lid. Always make sure that you shake it so that you make sure that it will stay completely suspended within itself. That foam brush has been in that jar for probably 2.5, maybe even as long as 3 months. I've used it on several projects. You can see the application of the material. I'm not being overly cautious, overly worried about any of the portions of it, because at this point with the first coat, that walnut is going to soak up this finish very fast. So after it's been sitting for only 25 minutes, the first coat is dry. I'm using a 1000 grit, happens to be a sanding sponge, but 220 grit, 320, 600 grit, anything is going to work for this first coat. Be sure to always shake your finish. And again, just applying liberally with the foam brush. And again, not being overly cautious with how much material I'm applying.